Hi and welcome. So I have selected a reference photo and have tried to use an easy one. So here we have a bright-eyed bushy-tailed expression. This might not turn out to be as easy as I'm hoping because she's not really showing any of her lower eyelashes here, but and lower eyelids, but we'll see how it goes. So I have my graphite pencils here and my eraser, and I think I'm really ready. This is a plain notebook, and I think I'm going to start with just a basic sketch. I usually use 2B pencil for that. So because of some reason I used to starting at the temple, and then I sketch the brows and the eyes, and then I keep moving on. What I'm basing this on is basically I'm using the distance from the elements I've already drawn in, and then I'll be deleting and adjusting and improving as I go. But as this phase is the most important for achieving likeness, you might want to use a grid. I have used a grid at the beginning, but frankly, although I can see why that's useful, I just can't be bothered. It's really boring. So I do it like this, very basic sketching, and I'm more into trial and error than doing it right from the very first attempt. So you can see that now I've sketched the eye, and I will now use this distance here to determine where the nose should be. Of course, you know that I should have started by drawing the shape of her head and then dividing it into sections and etc., and I did do that at the beginning, but now I'm really used to seeing these proportions and angles in a drawing, so I do not feel that I need to do it. But definitely, if you feel more secure, you might want to start that way. So you can still see that I'm measuring individual distances against one another, and this is easy if you're using a cell phone which is right next to the paper on which you're drawing, because then you can draw in the same scale. So if I wanted to use this reference photo but draw a bigger picture, then I would definitely need to use a grid. But as I'm using this in the very same scale, I'm drawing this in the very same scale, I'm just copying the distances, and I have to admit that this is not something that I can really talk a lot about how I do this, because I think it has a lot to do with me spending a very significant chunk of my youth studying maths and especially geometry. And although in geometry you should actually imagine more than draw, I don't really think I have this visual side, visual imagination. So if there was a mathematical geometric problem with let's say an angle or a triangle with specific angles, then it would really help me if I could draw a triangle with those angles rather than just imagine them. So I got really good at drawing quite accurate angles. So I can, in a way, recognize a lot of these angles, and that's basically very important for this approach to sketching that I have. And you'd basically need to find your own way, and as I said, if you're going to feel more secure in the result, you might want to use the grid or any other type of measurements that would help you get to the point of achieving the basic likeness. And at this phase, where we are still sketching and not shading, we really need just the basic likeness. And again, I'm not really sure how to determine when I have sufficient likeness and when I'm satisfied with what I've achieved in this phase. But it's quite similar to this issue of knowing when a drawing is over, when it is done, because it's something that one just feels, and it's really something that's individual. Not much I can say about that. What helps is if you start with drawing a face that's very familiar to you, and then I guess you will be able to recognize this person in just a few lines, and for that to be sufficient. I prefer drawing people, portraits of people that I know. But of course, sometimes you only have one photograph and you want to assure that people who know this person in real life can also recognize that it's a portrait of that person, and that takes a bit of courage, but certainly can be done. If I were drawing a person I didn't know, I might say that this is not sufficient likeness, but I think that at this point, I think this sketch will do, because a lot of what I can now notice as issues with this are going to be very easily resolved once I get to the shading phase, and a lot of likeness in this particular person will be achieved with shading because of the shape of her face, because I need to put in these quite distinctive cheeks or the shape of the face, and then it will look a lot more like her. And now I'm just putting in some of the finishing touches on my basic sketch, and you can see I'm still checking to see whether these distances match. She has this pointy chin and this little dimple on one side of her face. I'm just putting in some of the shading just to check whether this will look like her once we are done, and I think You might be surprised, but I think this is quite enough for the initial sketching part. So I will see you in the next phase, where I will do some more shading and we will get a much better result. But this is enough for the beginning.